Thank you all for coming to this event. Welcome. It's nice to have you all here. I begin with something of a disadvantage. The talk I'm trying to give here is actually accepted from my second book, which I'm holding here. So it's part of a very large argument, and I'm not going to be able to present all the argument in 30 minutes. So I'm going to do a slide run through and punctuate that with text, in the slides. So the basic issue that I'm dealing with right now is about the question of the canon of African art. How has this canon been formulated? What are its constituent works? More importantly, how does the canon support or prevent the emergence of new works from being considered as canonical in African culture? And what this means in essence is basically the distinction between African artworks that were taken out of the continent and are now present in global museums all over the world, and the continued existence in Africa of cultural properties that have equal antiquity but are not recognized as being authentic because they are in Africa. So this then it becomes a fairly diabolical catch-22. How do you, if you found an authentic African artwork in Africa, how do you prove that it's an authentic piece when it's actually, So in a situation where that should not be an issue, I mean, it would be problematic to not find authentic African artworks in Africa. But somehow, just the mere presence of actually being in Africa works against the so-called, canonicity, authenticity of the work. So, needless to say, I found this initially mirthful and then increasingly exasperating. And after a while, I decided maybe it's time to do something about it. So the project that I ended up doing, which resulted in this book, is actually the first significant effort to document and critically engage a collection of African art that's located on the African continent. And in this case, it's a collection of art from Nigeria, which is recognized worldwide as having one of the significant art traditions in the world, and not just in Africa. So the issue of African collectors and the canon of African art is a fairly straightforward issue. I evaluate the material process of formalizing and interpreting such collections with the goal of defining how they might be incorporated into a context of African art studies in which they are currently invisible. African collectors of African art face a major problem of scholarly validation because their collections circulate outside of established Western systems of representation. And their constituent artworks are often automatically suspected as fakes, contemporary reproductions, or otherwise poor examples of known archetypes. This being a blanket dismissal that is not supported by any engagement whatsoever. It's not that these works have been studied and found to be fake, it's just that there is this general assumption about them. So as a result of such perceptions, African art studies and the art market in general frame the production of value for African art as an exclusively Western process, and also assumes that for African artworks to gain any discursive or fungible value, they must be held in a Western collection and circulate within Western context of knowledge production. So in using the Femi Akinsoye African Art Collection to engage this issue, my interest is simply to look at the idea of the canon and how one might actually add works to the canon or have the canon engage with other works that could be equally authentic.